during the Revolution following the Battle of White Plains. And I'm going to have a lot of surprises for people who may think you know the history very well, but there's always a surprise lurking. There were quite a few surprises for me when I was researching this book. So without further ado, we'll get into it. So we've got this is the view of the Revolution that we would like to have, and it's probably the one we learned in grade school, everybody crisply attired and observing, punctilious military etiquette, flags flying and bows and swords and everything. But the real revolution was a lot messier, a lot more violent, a lot more bitter, a lot of no mercy being shown to either side. And it's been termed America's first civil war, and that's really not an exaggeration. In many areas of the country, it was a civil war. Brother against brother, father against sons, daughters against mothers, neighbor versus neighbor. And not just here in Westchester, but many areas around the country. Just to name a few, the Jersey Pine Barrens, the Hackensack Valley in New Jersey, the Mohawk Valley here in New York, where this particular massacre is taking place, and right here in good old Westchester County. Now, I should explain the terms. Westchester was referred to as the neutral ground, and reading that you might get the impression it was some kind of a Switzerland in the 18th century where everything was left alone, but far from it. Now, the territory we're talking about, for most of the war, the Americans up in the north there, they held lines along more or less the Croton River. And from time to time, they would extend the lines down further where the dotted blue line is. They were roughly on a line at Tarrytown, White Plains. The British, for their part, held the bridgeheads over the Harlem River out of Manhattan, as well as the Loyalist enclave in deep South Bronx, Morrisania. And between the two, they did not try to occupy the territory for a lot of complicated reasons. But they did try to dominate it. There were patrols, there were raiders, and it became a very, very lawless place with Civil War type fighting taking place. And just for a quick geography lesson, when I say Westchester County, in the 18th century, this includes the present-day Bronx. Bronx was not split off from Westchester. It was done in two phases, 1872 and 1895, and didn't become its own county until 1914. So when we say Westchester, the neutral ground, we're talking all the way down to the Harlem River. Now, the Revolution did not break out all of a sudden. It's actually the end product of about a 10-year period of rising argumentation and division taking place in society, beginning with the Stamp Act, 1765. And then, with the occasional pause, occasional up and down, it increased over the years until it reached a head, 1774, 1775. There's a picture there on the right. It's a very good picture. It was a participatory reenactment held in Maine a few months ago, reproducing one of these contentious New England meetings, protesting the Stamp Act or the Intolerable Acts or whatever. And I like the girl in the hat. She was really getting into it. I don't want to cross paths with her. And the picture on the left, I took that in Colonial Williamsburg. They reproduced a bit of colonial street theater. And they wound up burning that effigy, by the way. It was great fun. But be that as it may, building up the contentions between the two sides, loyalist or patriot, one of the leading figures here in Westchester County during what became known as the Pamphlet War was this very dignified gentleman, the Reverend Samuel Seabury Jr. And he was the rector at St. Peter's Church in what today is Westchester Square in the Bronx. And he also held a pulpit at Old St. Paul's up in Mount Vernon, Eastchester. Now in those days, this was the 18th century version of a podcast. You issued pamphlets arguing one side or the other. And Seabury, being a man of words, a man of thought, and a very loyal member of the king. Remember, as an Anglican priest, he had taken an oath to the British monarchy. So he wrote these pamphlets arguing that, the sensible thing to do is to stay loyal to the crown, let's not get out of hand here and go for independence or too much rebellion. And he signed them a Westchester farmer. And this is the way it was done back then. You didn't sign your own name to these pamphlets. It was quite acceptable to use a pseudonym. And this way you didn't have somebody show up on your doorstep, with a pistol or a horsewhip in hand. But you could tell from this picture that, Reverend Seabury was a man who was accustomed to be taken seriously. And you can imagine just how irked he must have been to find out that all these brilliant pamphlets he was issuing were being refuted by some smart aleck college kid down in Manhattan. And as it turned out, the smart aleck kid literally was a smart aleck. It was a very young chap by the name of Alexander Hamilton. He was a second-year student in what was then King's College, at today's Columbia University. This is a seldom seen portrait of him at the age of 15, but he was only about 2 or 3 years older when he started issuing his own series of pamphlets, The Farmer Refuted. And this was a watershed moment in a couple of ways. Alex at this time, he's a sophomore in college, and it's the time of life you're not sure where your life is going to take you. This was a revelation to young Hamilton. A, he could write, and B, he was very good at political argumentation. And now poor Samuel Seabury, he's trying to defend the crown, and he's unwittingly launching the career of one of the founders. But by the time we got to 1776, this county was pretty well divided. People had made up their minds, had been reading pamphlets, talking to one another. And so by 11th of July, 1776, they read out the Declaration of Independence from the steps of the White Plains Courthouse. And it was read out to a very deeply divided county, a very deeply divided town too, right? The vicinity of the courthouse. Now, about 50 yards away from where everybody's standing was the Hatfield Tavern. And this was a known Loyalist hangout, where just a few months before, Loyalists had gathered to sign a Declaration of Dependence, affirming the loyalty to the crown and the Constitution, everything else. The guy in the green jacket is looking straight at it. The catty corner across the road from the Hatfield Tavern was another tavern that was the Patriot hangout. And they just pretty much glared at one another. This gives you an example of how deeply divided the community was, and also families too. Now, the Hatfield Tavern was run by a staunch loyalist by the name of Abraham Hatfield. His son Daniel would end up fighting with the Patriots at the Battle of White Plains just 2 months after this declaration was read out. Just one example among many of divided families here in Westchester. Now, the divisions were not carried out politely or with pamphlets all the time. It got very violent on both sides. And depending on which side had the upper hand in your community, it could be very, very rough on you, particularly among the loyalists. There were hangings, there was brutal floggings, tar and feathering. And I won't get into all the gruesome details, but there was a wave of violence went through Westchester County. And particularly the northern parts of the county where the Patriots held the upper hand, a lot of loyalists would be literally driven from their homes and farms. It was just too dangerous to hang around among their neighbors. I should mention there was a third force here in Westchester County, the Quakers. Now, we think Quakers, we think, Pennsylvania, William Penn, the guy in the oatmeal box. But it's not fully realized how much New York and New Jersey were also havens, for the Society of Friends, and particularly here, southern Westchester County. There were a number of congregations, and the word they used was meetings, that some of them dated back to the 1680s. Here in Scarsdale, for example, in Chappaqua, Paulding, several other places as well. Now, the problem being the Quaker, now, part of their religion, as you know, totally eschewed any kind of violence or military participation. So they declared themselves as neutral. We're not going to support either side. So, of course, you know what happens. They catch hell from both sides. The loyalists will assume that, well, you're not with us, you're against us, you're closet patriots, and the patriots assume the same thing in reverse. So the Quaker community suffered a lot during these times. So we get into the mayhem. Now, one of the leading figures in what would become the violence of the neutral ground is a fellow by the name of James Delancey. And he was from a very prominent Huguenot mercantile family based in New York. James was actually a branch of the family that was situated on the Bronx River, deriving its wealth from a number of mills. James was absolutely, totally loyalist, and he opened up his extensive lands as a haven for loyalists that were fleeing the violence to the north to come down, settle and get some kind of shelter under his protection. In front of where he's situated, I don't know if you're familiar with the southern end of the Bronx Zoo, but this is sometimes called the Delancey Dam, sometimes the 182nd Street Dam. And the Delancey Mansion was just off through the foliage over to the right upper corner, about where you see the monorail that today goes to Wild Asia. Is situated about where the monorail makes its landfall. And his estate was extensive. It was pretty much exactly the footprint of today's Bronx Zoo. And it was the kind of place where he came up, for a Masterpiece Theater type of weekend, and it would end up with a carriage ride around the Bronx River and stop at the Rocking Stone, which is still there in the Bronx Zoo. And James Delancey, he was a pretty powerful guy. He'd get out and put his muscles into it, and he'd rock the stone back and forth, and all the ladies go, oh, and entertainments were a lot simpler in those days. But don't try it. If you go to the Bronx Zoo, don't try this. This doesn't rock anymore, by the way. They cemented it. They're afraid somebody's going to rock it too far. But it's still there, right outside the House of Darkness, if you're looking for it. So Delancey had all these loyalist refugees pouring into West Farms and Morrisania. And he decided to organize a loyalist militia that would strike back at the Patriots. Now, for various reasons, Delancey's men were never taken into the British Army establishment as a loyalist regiment. The reasons can only be speculated at. So they never really had an official name. They were known by various names: Delancey's Refugees, the Westchester Refugees, the Associated Loyalists, the Westchester Chasseurs. They should have stuck with that one, but more commonly, they were referred to as the Cowboys. And this was where the term entered the English language. And it most certainly did not mean Hopalong Cassidy or John Wayne in a white hat. It was a pejorative term. And it would remain so right into the 20th century. Back in the old Wild West, you referred to somebody as a cowboy, you better have your gun in hand, because he was going to have his out in a moment. Now, they got this term because Delancey's men, they needed some kind of cash flow to maintain themselves. So they would go raiding up throughout Westchester County, up and down the Bronx River, and they would raid Patriot farms, and they'd drive off the cattle. There's big money in cattle, because the British in New York were trying to live off rotten beef that had been shipped across the Atlantic. And fresh meat on the hoof, they pay serious money, gold and silver. So this maintained the financial arrangements for the cowboys, and maybe not always Patriot farmsteads. If you were sort of wishy-washy or sitting on the fence, they'd raid you anyway, or maybe even if you were a loyalist, they'd raid you anyway. We need the cattle. Oh, sorry, you're a loyalist? Oh, well, come down to Manhattan and get a refund. They're really quite ruthless about it. Now, on the Patriot side, you not only had the Cowboys, but you had a lot of ad hoc loyalist groups that yeah, they would claim, loyalty to the crown that they were fighting for, and in fact, they're really out for themselves. And on the Patriot side, these bandits were known as Skinners. And again, they would say, we're patriots, we're pro-independence, but, we're raising money, for the cause. But the money would go right into their pockets. And the term is, there's a little bit of controversy about the origin of the term Skinners. Where did this come from? And I have a theory. Now, one theory is that they were named Skinners because they robbed victims of their clothing. That makes sense, but my idea is that the Skinners, the Patriot Skinners, were known to make a specialty of trashing the houses that they raided. They come into your farmstead, they make off with, gold valuables, cattle, whatnot. And they wouldn't stop there, they stopped to smash up the furniture, and then as a parting shot, they would peel the wallpaper down off the walls. They literally skin the walls. It's sort of like a little bit of class, disdain being expressed here. Anyway, that's my theory. Nobody knows for sure. But amidst all the Cowboys and the Skinners, there were a lot of regular units that were led by commanders that spread fear and violence throughout Westchester County. And one of the leading figures on the British side was John Graves Simcoe. Now, if you remember the AMC series Turn, you might recognize the name, and he was portrayed in the series as sort of an entertainingly psychotic fellow. And it was one of these characters, when they come on screen, something interesting's about to happen. But the real John Graves Simcoe was a very sober-sided guy. He was not psychotic, and he was far from entertaining. In fact, he was known for having like a zero sense of humor. He wasn't a mean guy, but he just you tell him a joke, he'd just look at you like, yeah. Like whatever, synapse he needed to process humor just wasn't there. But he organized one of the most effective and lethal loyalist units in the war, the Queen's Rangers. And that's a fellow on the left there in the uniform that Simcoe himself designed for him. And another one was Bannister Charlton, who picked up a very gruesome reputation as the war went on. He was variously known as Bloody Ben or the Green Dragoon. And his worst atrocities took place in the South, but here in Westchester County, he's probably most famous for the burning of Bedford, which is sometimes reenacted during the summer, and also the burning of Pound Ridge. He liked setting buildings on fire. This was like his big thrill. And he led a organization, the British Legion, which is made up of a combination of loyalists and American deserters or anybody else who could get into a green uniform and could ride a horse. Very, very effective and feared unit. And another one was Andreas Emmerich. He led a mainly Hessian German unit known as Emmerich's Chasseurs. That was a very popular term in the 18th century. It was a French word meaning, chasers or hunters, and was often applied, to cavalry units. Emmerich's Chasseurs are very feared for about a year, and then they broke up for a lot of interesting reasons. But Emmerich, by the way, would come to a very interesting end 30 years later. He'd be executed for a plot in which he tried to kidnap Napoleon's brother. Long story, but... And this fellow, Beverly Robinson, he's one of my favorites, because I always think of him as a very, very tragic figure. Robinson, believe it or not, was a boyhood friend of George Washington down in Fredericksburg. Only Beverly came north. He married into the ultra-loyalist Phillips family and got himself a nice estate. He was sitting just on the east bank of the Hudson, just above where Garrison, New York is today. And of course, like so many, he had to flee his home, but he organized the Royal American Regiment, which had a very good reputation for dependability among the British staff. And yes, there's a reenactment unit that portrays them today. Now, I should mention, you see all these guys that are wearing green. We think of red coats versus blue coats. But the war was a lot more colorful than that. Among the British, the red livery was only for the king's regulars. Anybody else, volunteers, loyalists, you couldn't wear the red. That was for like the real soldiers. So all these guys had to be clad in green. And Beverly's unit was green with red facing, so it must have been handy at the Christmas party. But the American side had some colorful characters too. It's very lethal characters. Top of which was Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee. In a lot of ways, he was a counterpart to Bannister Tarleton. Maybe not quite as crazy, but close to it. He had his moments. My favorite Harry Lee story was, when he caught a deserter. He had it up to here with deserters at one point. And they caught a deserter, had him shot at a firing squad, and then directed that his head be cut off and stuck on a pole and set up over the encampment. And word this got to Washington, and you could always tell when Washington's really annoyed with somebody because he get very, very formal in his correspondence. And he sent Lee a letter saying something to the effect that I pray you, sir, in further cases of this kind, not to diversify the punishment. But he was a very, very effective cavalry commander. And if you're wondering, yes, this is the father of Robert E. Lee. You look at this portrait, this is almost exactly like an iconic portrait of Robert E. Lee. Just add a gray beard and you wouldn't know the difference. That's another personal favorite of mine, being of Breton descent myself. Charles Treffin Armand, the Marquis de la Rouerre. Lafayette was not the only Marquis serving in the American service. There's quite a list of high-ranking aristocrats fighting for American independence. He was a colorful character. He had to flee to America. He got into a duel, which is a swashbuckling thing to do back then. Only he wounded the guy who turned out to be a cousin of King Louis XVI. Not a good career move. So he's like one step ahead of the Bastille and got into a ship and came over and volunteered his services. But very, very effective commander. Washington thought very highly of this guy. And he was one of the few people that James Delancey was afraid of. Because Armand made several attempts to capture James Delancey. Came very close, never quite succeeded. But and this, Al mentioned Armand Louis de Bouton, the Duc de la Zune. He came over with Rochambeau in 1781, and he led, which I would argue would be the best dressed unit ever to prowl the neutral ground. A very colorful, a classic 18th century mercenary force, the Hussars. And they were known, for the tall shako and the all embroidered tunic, the little cape over one shoulder. And of course, you had to yell huzzah as you got around. But he played a brief but very significant role here in the neutral ground. He actually got chased James Delancey out of Westchester County at one point. So among the high-ranking commanders, you had a very valuable corps of American patriots who were known as the Westchester Guides. And for the most part, I can't find any portraits of these men, but two of the leading figures were brothers, Abraham and Isaac Odell. And Isaac Odell, he was known by the nickname of Uck, U-C-K. The reason he was known as Uck Odell is that, believe it or not, at this time, and in this family, there are no less than 4 Isaac Odells running around. I don't know why people do this, like, dude buy a baby book or something. But this kind of thing makes genealogists crazy, but Isaac Odell would play a key role in one of the greatest American victories to happen in the neutral ground. Another interesting figure among the Westchester Guides was John Dean. As far as I know, this is no relationship to the Watergate John Dean, but he lived in Tarrytown, and he did a lot of service with the Guides. He was one of the people who brought in John Andre when he was busted in 1780. And when he wasn't on duty, John Dean would wage his own private war. Sorry, this is not a better picture, but standing to this day alongside the Sawmill River Parkway, in Rockefeller State Park along the South County Trailway, got this immense glacial boulder. It's known as John Dean's Rock. That was his favorite ambush spot. He'd lay in wait there, wait for a Tory or a loyalist to come along and then open fire on them. By the way, his rifle is in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, if you want to see it sometime. But there's an interesting postscript to the story that most of these lands in the late 1800s were bought up by some oil baron from Ohio, a guy by the name of John Dean Rockefeller. And he was just thrilled. Oh, they named a rock after me. How cool is that? And that became one of his favorite spots for his carriage rides. He'd get off and he'd take a rest there. And lastly, the youngest of the guides, and consequently the only one who actually lived long enough to have his be photographed, was Andrew Corsa. Now he was 17 years old at the time in 1781, and he was living on the family farm, which is about where Fordham University campus is today. And one fine day, what shows up in the dooryard is like the entire high command of the Patriot cause. There was Washington, there was Rochambeau, there was Lafayette, you name it. It was like an all-star cast. And what they were doing there is that Washington wanted to scout out possible ways of getting across the Harlem River and bashing his way onto Manhattan Island and storming New York City. Only didn't have any good maps of the area. So called on young Andrew, who knew all the roads and knew all the terrain, act as a guide, take us all around. So Andrew spent the whole afternoon guiding the whole high command up and down the Harlem River. And the end result is Washington just could not find a route to victory in the South Bronx. So they went back to Fordham, they dropped Andrew off at the farm and made their way back to Dobbs Ferry. Poor Andrew, though, his dad was a declared loyalist. And he was so mad at this incident, he formally disinherited Andrew from any share in the estate. And consequently, when the loyalist estate was confiscated at the end of the war, Andrew did not have a claim to the family farm. He just had to see the whole thing get sold off and just nothing for him. So patriotism is not always rewarded in those days. And can't go home tonight without mentioning Deborah Sampson, the woman soldier of the Revolution. And if you get a chance at some reenactment or event this year, there's a young woman by the name of Judith Calora, who personifies Deborah Sampson. Get a chance to see her performance, do so. You'll come away, you would swear you have met the real Deborah Sampson. But she served here right at the end of the war in 1782 in a Massachusetts unit. And she got wounded in a fight in Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow comes up a lot in this story. Then she took a sword blow to the head. She had a bullet wound in the leg. And this is kind of how you get busted, right? Well, she kind of concealed the leg wound. She just went to the doctor. Doc, could you patch my head up? Yeah, sure. He sewed her back up. And then what she did, she went off into the woods and got out her pocket knife. And this is how tough people were in those days. Got out her pocket knife, dug the bullet out of her leg, no antiseptic or anything, and bandaged it up as best she could and just went back to duty. She did eventually get busted, but not this time. Very interesting character in her own right. So some of the instances of fighting that took place here in the neutral ground, starting out at the outset, there was a major attack on the Ward House in Tuckahoe. And I'll give a shout out to the Friends of the Stephen Ward House, which have just this past year secured funding and are trying to preserve the house as an historic destination. But it was an incident where the Americans had gone down to attack James Delancey's stronghold in Morrisania. And they ran off with some cattle and prisoners, and then went back up the White Plains Road to Tuckahoe. And they figured, okay, that's it, nobody's going to chase after us. Wrong. The British and Hessians were hot on their tail. And there's some very, very bitter fighting took place here in the Ward House. There's a monument right across the street that's there to this day. And, it's an example of don't believe everything you see on a monument. Now, I swear I've looked at this thing like 20 times and I did not notice the date is wrong. The incident took place 16th of March, 1777, not November 18th. But be that as it may, Captain Samuel Ward was the leading casualty of this fight. And he's somebody that, had he lived, probably would have been numbered among the founders. Just example, the waste that war produces. Another notable and sanguinary incident was the Stockbridge Massacre, last day of August 1778. And this took place in the Bronx, in the northeast corner of Van Cortlandt Park, where there is an old monument there today. That's the one on the right, in which a group of, they're actually the Stockbridge Indians, were serving in Worston's army as scouts. In fact, they'd been serving for several years. And they got ambushed by a loyalist ambush that included James Delancey, Bannister Tarleton, and John Graves Simcoe. And as a consequence, they're nearly all wiped out. Only a few survivors made their way back to the American encampment. So there's a monument to this day. They're still honored on Memorial Day. And there is a splendid new monument to Chief Daniel Ninham. That's right on the road between Fishkill and Beacon. And that's just showing you part of it here in this picture, if you're ever going that way. It's just unveiled about 5 years ago. So part of the payback for the Stockbridge Massacre would be the Battle of Edgar's Lane. This happened a month later in what today is Hastings on Hudson. The battleground is right about where the main street of Hastings comes in with the Route 9. And there's an historical marker there to tell you about it. But better still, the Hastings Historical Society, just the last couple of years, have put together a series of informative signboards. And it's worth pulling over to park and go to this little plaza and read these signboards, because this will walk you through the battle step by step. It's a brilliant, brilliant piece of work. And there was one notable incident involved a cousin of mine. Yes, a rather distant cousin, but Aaron Burr, who at the beginning of 1779 had just celebrated his 23rd birthday. And he was a colonel in the American Army. This was a young man's war, by all means. And he was given command of the American lines that were then around White Plains, Tarrytown. And he'd been hearing about all these depredations by James Delancey's cowboys. And Burr was a man of action. He didn't sit still for many things. He said, that's it, I've had it. We're going to fix these guys. We're going to show them who's in charge here. So a very creative guy. He got together some earthenware flasks, filled them full of lamp oil, issued them out to a hand-picked group of horsemen. And in the middle of the night, this is February, it's not time you want to go gallivanting around, but went down there the White Plains Road right up to Delancey's stronghold in West Farms, where he had a blockhouse that guarded the southernmost bridge over the Bronx River. We don't know exactly what it looked like, but mostly these things were built to the same pattern, like this example on the right, which is from Nova Scotia. So they went up it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, they go up to the blockhouse, they throw the flasks and break them through the windows, followed up by flaming torches, and in a second, the whole blockhouse went up like a Ronson lighter. The amazing thing is nobody got killed or injured in this whole thing. The garrison woke up in time, they all spilled out, and Burr rounded them up in about less than 20 minutes. They were galloping back up the White Plains Road. James Delancey got out of bed, checked it out, and his beautiful blockhouse by then was laying in ashes. And this would be the beginning of the downfall of James Delancey. He was never quite as powerful as he had been up to this point. As happened at the Morrisania raid in January 1781, this was a very successful raid was launched against James Delancey's encampment. And for some reason it qualified for a commemorative postcard back during the bicentennial. But this would be significant for a lot of reasons, that this would provoke probably the bloodiest incident of the neutral ground. A few months later, the Pines Bridge Massacre. Now this happened in what today is Yorktown Heights, just on the north side of the Croton River. And the target was one of the finest units in the Continental Army. It was the 1st Rhode Island, which is notable not just for being one fine unit, but it was mostly African American. They'd been recruited from freedmen, they were recruited from slaves that the owners had been compensated for, with a couple of companies of Europeans and also a company of Narragansett Indians. And once again, there's another splendid new monument is there, just unveiled, I think, 3 years ago in downtown Yorktown Heights. And it's a beautifully inclusive and startlingly accurate rendition of the fighting that took place on the 14th of May, 1781. Got the African-American fellow on the left there with his rifle. He's wearing this distinctive, hat they had. It was a great mitre hat with a big, huge anchor on it. The Commander Colonel Green is over on the right with his sword out, and he would die in this incident. And standing in back is a Narragansett Indian. And classic Algonquin fighting stance, tomahawk in one hand and pistol in the other. And we know they researched this fellow. You can tell he's a Narragansett because of the pattern of the moccasin that is in the statue. I can't show it in this picture, but this is the depth of detail they went to in creating this monument. So by all means, if you're going up there anytime soon, probably sometime in May, they have a weekend, the Rochambeau weekend up there, which is a big, huge reenactment. So if you're heading that way, stop off and admire the monument. And the worst bloodshed took place in the Davenport house, which is still standing. And but it's a private residence, so I'm using an old picture to depict it. Once in a while, the Yorktown Historical Society will have an open house weekend, with guided tours. So you want to keep an eye on that, and you get a chance to view the Davenport house. There's still some damage from the fighting that can be seen in the woodwork of the house. And the fighting went on right up to the very end of the war. We think of Yorktown, October 1781. That's the end of the war. No, it wasn't. Right into 1783, there were still people being killed here in the neutral ground. And one of the prominent casualties was another Westchester guide by the name of Brom Dykeman, or Dykeman, it's commonly pronounced. And if you're wondering if this has anything to do with the Dykeman Street or the Dykeman Farmhouse at 200th Street and Broadway in northern Manhattan, yes, that's the same family. But Brom had been personally tasked by George Washington with capturing or killing James Delancey. And this became his war-long obsession. He made several attempts to capture Delancey, and the last one resulted in his own death. Had a successful raid, but they didn't nab Delancey, so they were chased back north, and there was another skirmish in what today is downtown Mount Vernon, where this marker still stands, and Dykeman was killed in the action. Okay, well, that's enough, mayhem. We'll have some fun stuff here. Spies. Now, this is the part that took place almost where we're sitting. It's right here in this neighborhood. There was a very long, espionage war went on up and down the Bronx River. Spy versus spy, scouts and things like that. And in 1818, a young fellow from upstate, guy on the right, a fellow by the name of James Cooper, bought a farm here in Scarsdale, about where the Fenway Golf Club is today, if you're familiar with the area. He settled down, he wanted to be a gentleman farmer, but he had literary ambitions too. And he was casting around for some kind of really an American theme he could write a novel about. Well, he was deep friends with another Westchester resident by by the name of John Jay. And before Jay became a diplomat or first justice of the Supreme Court, during the war, he had been a spy master here in Westchester County. And he would get together with James of an evening, and he'd tell James all these stories from his memory of the agents he ran and some of the incidences that happened. Now, Jay was very careful. He was a good spy master, didn't reveal any names or any telling details. He just kind of like told the stories. And Cooper takes us all in, and the light bulb goes off. I got a theme for a novel. It did. It became the first American-written bestseller, The Spy. And it's still worth reading today. Whatever you think of James Fenimore Cooper, this is one book that's worth picking up, because so much of it is based on the events here in Westchester County during the Revolution. And of course, as soon as the book came out, people are reading it, and they think, oh, this had to be based on somebody for real. There's a lot of speculation. It continues to this day. Who is the model for the protagonist of The Spy? It was a peddler spy by the name of Harvey Birch. So who is the real Harvey Birch? Well, situations like that, the first one into print wins the game. So a fellow by the name of Enoch Crosby got himself a ghostwriter, and he came out a couple years later with Enoch Crosby, or The Spy Unmasked, the tale of the American Revolution, which were basically his memoirs when he served as a spy and secret agent, and all situations that he got into during the war. Now, was he really the model for Enoch Crosby? Both Cooper and Jay vehemently deny that this was based on anybody real. Particularly Jay swear he never gave out any names. So, take your pick. As speculation continues this day, but Enoch Crosby, though, was very much for real. And most of what he revealed in his memoirs did take place. He's remembered to this day that there's at least 3 historical markers in and around Westchester and Putnam that reference him. And his gravesite is honored to this day by the Enoch Crosby chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And I'm sorry, I can't get a better picture of this thing no matter how I try, but there's a monument just right outside this building on your way to the parking lot, and it's a rare thing, a monument to a fictitious character. It depicts Harvey Birch with his peddler's pack and just kind of making his way along. And if you look closely, you can't see it in this picture, but just over his shoulder there's like a ghostly visage of the spy master George Washington. So if you haven't noticed it, take a look as you go back to your car. Now, probably the most consequential spy mission of the war happened here in Westchester, and it was carried out by a woman, a very remarkable woman by the name of Ann Bates. Now, who was Ann Bates? She was a Loyalist refugee from Philadelphia who volunteered her services as a spy for the British Army. Now, at the time, of course, spy business women are very vulnerable, physically very vulnerable, but there was one big advantage that they enjoyed with the very rigid gender distinctions of the day, that it was pretty much 100% assumed by men, and probably most women too, that, guns and drums, military stuff, that was all guy stuff, that was all like History Channel stuff, and a woman would neither know nor care about any of it. So it's easy for a woman to play dumb, if you got busted, somebody, what were you doing poking around, the artillery park? I don't know, those guns, But it's basically what you get away with, but Ann Bates was not one of these ignorant women. She was married to a guy who was an armorer for the British Army, guy responsible for keeping all the muskets and accoutrements in working order. So consequently, Ann Bates knew her way around the military camp. She knew what calibers of guns were, she knew what cannons were, what different tents signified, regimental flags, all this kind of stuff. So she was sent out to spy Washington's encampment, which then was just above White Plains. And she didn't do this in her ball gown. put on, kind of like raggedy clothes and let her hair get ratty. And she took on the persona of a poor widow woman by the name of Mrs. Barnes, who'd been widowed by the war and was trying to scrape by as a peddler, selling, combs, buttons, sewing kits, stuff like that the soldiers needed and the army didn't provide. So, she made her way up to the camp, and everybody's assuming she's just a poor old widow woman. Let her in, what harm can she possibly do? Well, a lot, as it turned out, because she's going around the camp doling out combs and buttons, and her eyes are open, and she's taking note of things. There's a colonel's tent, there's a general's tent. There's these guys are looking rather poorly. This many regimental flags. Oh, and there's artillery. There's a 3-pounder, 12-pounder. Oh, it's howitzers too. A number of howitzers. She's storing all this in her head. She's definitely not writing this down. Stores it all in her head. She had an extraordinary memory. And she went back to New York and turned in an amazingly detailed report of the numbers and strength of Washington's army as it then existed in the summer of 1778. Now, this would be consequential in 2 ways. And on two occasions, by the way, Anne would also innocently, she'd wander right into Worston's headquarters, which was the Purdy house that's there in White Plains. And she'd just wander in, what are you doing here? I don't know. They'd hustle her out, but once she got a glimpse of George Washington disappearing around the corner. She didn't ask for his autograph, but she did see him. And this would be consequential too. As she turned into a report, the new British General Henry Clinton was kind of in a bind. He knew the Americans were about to attack Newport, Rhode Island. Didn't want to lose it. So he dispatched about 5,000 soldiers as reinforcements to the Newport garrison. And then having done so, this guy liked to dither. He started to dither. So, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have sent those guys as Washington up there in the White Plains. What if they come down and made like a ton of bricks and lose New York and oh my God. So Anne's report made it clear to him that Washington was in no position to storm Manhattan Island. So, okay, let the reinforcements go. The British won the Battle of Rhode Island, and they were held on to Newport for another year and a half. Now, this would be consequential later on, just about 100 years later, 200 years later. In White Plains, the Purdy house was about to be demolished for urban renewal. And the group that became the White Plains Historical Society was trying to preserve it, but they needed something, to put in the application. Now, there was a belief that it had been Washington's headquarters, but they couldn't quite say for sure. And meanwhile, people up in the Miller House would say, well, we're the real Washington's headquarters, we're for real, you're not. But eventually, the White Plains people did their research, and they turned up Anne Bates's report, which she mentioned being in that house in August 1778 and seeing George Washington disappear around the corner. QED, it was definitely Washington's headquarters in the summer of 1778, and that got the house saved. And it's there to this day. It's the headquarters of the White Plains Historical Society, and all kinds of events take place there. So, right for Anne Bates, she did a service for everybody. Now, the espionage war left its mark on the landscape in a number of different ways. Mainly, there was a lot of legends of hanging trees, and details of which you can believe or not believe. Some are more believable than others. One of the most prominent was one that stood on the road between Pelham Manor and Westchester Square in the Bronx. And this had a ghost story too. A number of people were supposed to have been hanged on it, including a British lieutenant. And the story had it, late night travelers on the road. This is before automobiles, of course. But they would encounter this ghostly figure of a forlorn British lieutenant, hanging around the hanging tree. It's not there anymore. It came down in the 1930s. But there were others too. At Peekskill, where Peekskill High School is today, was originally the Peekskill Military Academy. And that had a well-documented hanging tree in its front yard, which, definitely people were hanged on. and made a great campus legend, no doubt. Particularly to a young military student, a fellow by the name of L. Frank Baum, who came there as a student and literally followed the yellow brick road up from the train station. I'm not making this up. And whether this had any impact on the Wizard of Oz, I cannot say. But and there was another reputed hanging tree over by the Van Cortlandt house in the Bronx as well, and probably a few others that we've lost record of. But also, if you're going around Cortlandt Manor sometime, you might cross Gallows Hill Road. And yes, it's on the map and it's on the signposts. And wouldn't you love that as the return address for your Halloween cards? It'd be a great place for the Addams family to set up too. But Gallows Hill Road is for real. It leads up to the crest of Gallows Hill, in which you got a little body of water called Spy Pond. And all these names came about because that hill had been the center of an American encampment, various times off and on during the Revolutionary War. And spies and deserters were hanged on a gallows up there by Spy Pond. And there was one particularly notable incident where a British lieutenant was busted spying on the Americans, out of uniform, of course, and he was sentenced to be hanged. And the Royal Governor of New York, Thomas Tryon, sent a formal letter of protest to the American commander. He's basically saying, this guy's he's a commissioned British lieutenant. You know, you can't hang an officer. You know, what's the matter with you? Well, unfortunately, he sent this letter to the American commander, who's probably one of the totally no-nonsense people of the war. It's a guy by the name of Israel Putnam, who didn't suffered no fools gladly, we'll say. And his reply to Governor Tryon would become a classic. Sir, Nathan Palmer, a lieutenant in your service, was taken in my camp as a spy. He was tried as a spy. He was condemned as a spy. And you may rest assured, sir, he shall be hanged as a spy. Yes, afternoon, he is hanged. Too bad for Lieutenant Palmer, but and of course, the most famous spy incident of the war was the Arnold Andre affair, the end of which played out right here in Westchester in the neutral ground beneath the tulip tree in Tarrytown. And I won't try to summarize it all because this is worth a weekend conference. And trust me, I've been to some of these weekend conferences. It's a very detailed and convoluted story. But suffice to say, it played out there right in Tarrytown. And there's a monument to this day, and I'll just very quickly allude to something, because even if you're familiar with the monument, you may not have caught this. Andre was traveling under a assumed name of John Anderson, a merchant of Manhattan. And if you look at this statue there, look at the base, it was donated by John Anderson. Now, what, Andre donated his own monument? No, not quite. There's a very long story behind this, a tale of murder and madness with a link to Edgar Allan Poe, and I'll tell you about it later. If we have time at the end, I'll get into it if it's you really want to know. The war generated a lot of refugees, as we've mentioned, a lot of people driven on both sides, driven from their homes and farms. And one of the most notable examples was a woman by the name of Sarah Bishop. She was actually from Long Island. Her home had been burned down in a British raid. She quite possibly was assaulted by a British officer. We don't know for certain. But it is certain she was traumatized out of her mind. And she became a rootless refugee. She eventually fetched up in South Salem and lived out the rest of her life as a hermit in what's known to this day as Sarah Bishop's Cave. The cave is still there. It's now on private property, but once in a blue moon they do have tours. I've been there, and it's not much of a cave. It's about 6 feet long by 4 feet high, but just about enough room to lay down in. And poor Sarah spent like about 25 years living there as a hermit. Just one out of no doubt many examples of disrupted, torn up people who were wound up taking to the roads. Another example, this is a little controversial because we're not totally certain she really existed, but it's too good a story to pass up because this has become a landmark in Sleepy Hollow. Once again, we keep coming back to Sleepy Hollow. Hulda of Bohemia. She was a woman, again, a hermit, solitary person from what today is the Czech Republic, who lived in a cabin over in Rockefeller State Park, right by Spook Rock. So if you get on the Spook Rock Trail, you'll find the spot. Now, I won't get into that story. That's another bit of folklore. But she was an herbalist. She would gather, medicines from the forest. And people in Tarrytown, Sleepy Hollow, they kind of looked at her askance because, somebody from Bohemia was like a really exotic creature in 18th century Westchester. And it was averred, she's a witch. She's a witch, and they stayed away from her. Well, when the British raided Tarrytown, this probably would have been the incident in March 1777. The militia gathered atop the hill in what today is Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. And legend has it, again, I'm going to underscore legend here, but Hulda showed up, and she got hold of a musket, and she proved to be a crack shot, and she started picking off British soldiers, which annoyed the British immensely, so they concentrated their fire on poor Hulda, and she went down in a hail of lead. Well, at that point, all these people in Tarrytown who had been shunning her all these years, thinking, oh, Hulda's not such a bad person after all. She's a patriot, and we've been really mean to her. But what can we do now? Well, we'll give her a decent Christian burial. Not sure she's a Christian, but we'll bury her in the old Dutch churchyard. But we'll bury her along the north wall of the church. That was like the evil side of the church, the shady side, the cold side. And we won't mark her grave. We'll just bury her there, and okay, we've done the decent thing and leave it at that. So, but the legend went on, and about 10 years ago, the Friends of the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery got together, raised some funds, and they got a master stonecutter, a fellow by the name of Bob Carpenter, to replicate a tombstone in precise mid-18th century format. And they put that up. We don't know exactly where she's buried or even if she's buried at all, but they set this up on the north side of the church. And this has become the second most popular object in the Old Dutch churchyard, second only to Washington Irving's grave. And people come there and they leave all kinds of offerings on the tombstone, coins and rocks, but things like, now I'm not making this up, I've actually seen this, things like Mardi Gras beads, postage stamps, Tootsie Roll Pops. But if you go there, and again, a lot of coins, so if you need change for the bus, you know where to go. But if you go there, please don't leave coins on top of the tombstone. Because the middle of them is copper, and this leaches out, and this is why you got these green streaks running down the tombstone. But it's worth a visit, particularly around, Halloween. Oh, sorry. Oh, that was a bit of a, sorry, I hit the wrong button. Well, the war finally started wrapping up when the French landed and marched in from Newport, Rhode Island in the summer of 1781, and commanded by the splendid-looking fellow on the right, Comte de Rochambeau, which nobody knew how to spell. If you look at soldiers' letters, it's hilarious. They're trying to work their way around the French. But he met with George Washington. Again, I mentioned the Great Reconnaissance, in which he and Washington went looking for a way to get Washington onto Manhattan, and it was a total non-starter, and Washington was very disappointed and depressed. But he had his whole army of French behind him. This is a picture of Washington and Rochambeau saluting the arriving French. And you notice our friend the Duc de Lauzun is on the far right there. This guy, you see this guy always stands out in a crowd. And if you're wondering why everybody's dressed like the Good Humor Man, believe it or not, this was the French summer field livery at the time, white. This white was the color of the Bourbon dynasty. And the flag, by the way, is the Regiment des Soissonnais, the Soissons Regiment. One of the best units in the French army. It shows you the French did not send us second-rate troops by any means. So here's Washington. He's got, once in his life, he's got a professional army behind him, and he doesn't know what to do. Well, Rochambeau sent word one day, and one of the most consequential decisions of the war took place in this unassuming farmhouse. Now today it looks a lot better now because, and again another shout out, friends of the Rochambeau headquarters have been working for years raising funds and reviving this building. And they're just about done. I'm told that sometime later this year they're going to have a grand opening. Transform the house into a museum and with a surrounding campus of 18th century life, and definitely something to put on your destination list. Well, Washington and Rochambeau meet because Rochambeau had gotten word that the French fleet was coming north, not up to New York City, but they'll go as far as Chesapeake Bay, just for a few weeks. But Rochambeau's, okay, why don't we just forget about New York City? Now, if the French fleet gets its way up to the Chesapeake, if they can blockade the Chesapeake, if they can fight off the British Navy, and if you and I can get our troops together, make a mad dash 700 miles south, we could trap Lord Cornwallis's army, and that might be the winning stroke of the war. And the rest is history. History, by the way, that's commemorated every year by the Dobbs Ferry Historical Society. A great fun event, it's called the Road to Freedom. And they set out, it basically replicates the first mile of the march to Yorktown. So if you ever get a chance to join this event, it's well worthwhile. So we've been talking about a lot of, mayhem and terror and things going on, but I'll let you all go on a lighter note, because we're going to think of legacies and what lasting impact the Revolution and the neutral ground had in Westchester County. And you'll probably think of a piece of our folklore. It's very beloved to this day. That is Horseman. And look, he's for real. I mean, we saw him 2 years ago. We're up in Kingsland Point Park, and where else? Sleepy Hollow. And of course, if you don't believe that, there's a brand new historical marker in the old Dutch churchyard. So I get how he tethers his horse there every night. And who knows, maybe when they do the old Dutch days around the church, he might show up once again, or perhaps some other event. So that pretty much wraps us up. Now, I've alluded to a lot of, historical societies, friends of organizations. There are far too many, to just list. We'd be here for another half an hour just reading the list. But we're deeply indebted to all of these people and the hard work they do. But if you want to know where to go further, I'll just give you one website, and this is like the one-stop shop for everything that's going to happen in the coming year. Revolutionary Westchester 250, rw250.org. And you can also sign on to a monthly newsletter, electronic newsletter, that will list in detail every revolutionary event that is taking place here in Westchester, including talks by me. I'm there too. But I would strongly recommend it because this year, this is the 250th anniversary. There is going to be a lot going on here in Westchester and the surrounding counties. So keep up to it. You don't want to miss a reenactment. Just give you a couple of examples. In October, they're going to replicate the Battle of Pell's Point with a British landing at Orchard Beach in the Bronx and fighting their way inland. And there'll be a reenactment of the Battle of White Plains up in Ward Pound Ridge Reservation, and many other reenactments and events taking place. So keep your eyes out. History is alive, and of course, if you want to read up some more, I've just barely touched the surface of all the stuff that went on in those horrible years. But there's a book out, Westchester County, The American Revolution, Neutral Ground. I think there's copies here in the library. If you want to buy one, I would recommend right here in Scarsdale, go down to Bronx River Books, down by the train station. And I'm not sure if they have it in stock at the moment, but they could certainly order it for you. Or, you can go to the usual suspects, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever. But anyway, I just want to thank everybody, and I'm open to questions and comments. Thank you.
you go through that story of how the monument to Tarrytown?
Ah, okay, thank you. Thank you, you made my day. So I love telling this to people. I'm a bit of an Edgar Allan Poe scholar. Now, the real John Anderson was a tobacco merchant, Lower Manhattan. He made a fortune selling tobacco. He did a lot of innovative things like wrapping cigars in tinfoil so they wouldn't dry out. Or perhaps his most innovative thing, he had a shop there on Lower Broadway, have a personable young lady as a counter person. This wasn't done in the 1840s. This was a radical thing to take place, and particularly in the business district where there were no women whatsoever. So you had a lot of bored young men at lunch hour. They'd head over to John Anderson's, see the pretty lady. Of course, you'd have to buy a cigar or two. So Anderson made a fortune doing this. Now, the young woman was named Mary Rogers. And then, cutting the story short, one day she was found floating in the Hudson, strangled and mutilated. And the case is still unsolved to this day. But this prompted Edgar Allan Poe down then in Philadelphia to write one of his detective stories. And this became The Mystery of Marie Roget, which didn't solve the case either, but it's a classic Poe story. And as I said, this has never been solved. We've never say for sure who or what killed young Mary Rogers. But, the Whispering Gallery got started very early. That she had some kind of relationship with John Anderson, and that maybe she had died of an illicit abortion, and Anderson had put up the money for it, or maybe Anderson had even created the necessity for it in the first place. Whisper, 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 nothing really, substantiated. But this dogged Anderson for the rest of his life, even as he became a millionaire, a leading figure with a great big mansion here in Tarrytown. And he eventually lost his mind. Towards the end of his life, he was convinced that the ghost of Mary Rogers was stalking him, accusing him of something. And he wound up in his mansion here in Tarrytown. His mansion's been long torn down. But he eventually installed steel shutters over all the windows and doors of his mansion and barricaded himself inside the mansion where he lived alone for several years, just in fear that the avenging ghost of Mary Rogers. And I have a theory, and this is something I find very curious. He's buried in a mausoleum in Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery. Passed this by many times, and it's a beautiful mausoleum. It's one of these Greek revival things, with portico, but unusually for a Greek revival building, it has a double portico. You got the colonnade up front, the colonnade up back. And I wondered, did John Anderson decide on this to give himself a backdoor exit in case Mary Rogers chased him all the way to Brooklyn? I don't know, but the mausoleum is there. So that's a story behind the John Anderson who donated the monument in Tarrytown. So thank you. I just love telling that story. It's so cool. That's sort of close to folklore works too. Anyway, sir.
So for 40-something years, I've been living near Ridge Road and the Rochambeau house, the Odell house and whatnot. And I've seen just laying kind of fallow there. That's a...
Yeah.
They can't hear you.
They can't hear me in the back. The Odell house, right, Ridge Road in Hartsdale. And I'm kind of proud. I pointed out to people who haven't been to Hartsdale when we're driving Ridge Road and whatnot. And I understand, but the former historian of Greenberg gave us a talk once, and there's supposed to be bread baking, little oven stuff in the woods there. I'm not familiar whether there are still things there because the French bivouacked along Ridge Road.
That's right, yeah.
That's right. And then I was told that Washington's headquarters was on the next ridge over in Ardsley. I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Yeah, the building is gone. It's the site of a radio station now. So Rochambeau kept his house and Washington didn't for once.
And that's for the Battle of White Plains, or was that a different?
No, this is long after. This is 1781, immediately prior to the Yorktown campaign.
Okay.
Oh, lady in the back.
Hi, Stephen. You all see what a wonderful speaker Stephen is. I'm the co-president of the Eastchester Historical Society. He's coming to us at the Eastchester Library 2 weeks from tomorrow, and he's doing hostesses of the American Revolution. And you can see his research is impeccable, and his speeches are always entertaining. So
Yeah, it's Sunday the 29th at the Eastchester Public Library. And I'm going to give you a view of the American Revolution, which is quite unusual. It's not about guns and strategy and generals. It's about all the women that, you drive around and see, Washington's headquarters here, Washington's headquarters there. But who were the women who found themselves being the hostesses of the high command when they showed up at the doorstep, and what were their stories? And how, in some instances, did they use their social skills to influence the course of history, all without leaving their front parlor? A lot of surprises for you in this one. Sir?
Right near here, there's a street called Old Army Road. There's an historical marker near where I live, School 29 in Northeast Yonkers, saying that the Continental Army had an encampment right there by School 29, right behind the backstop for the baseball field, en route to the Battle of White Plains. And when I taught in Vernon at Mandela High School, there was a historical marker about Brom Dickman being killed in action in the encounter there. Are there any detailed maps of the different engagements in the no man's land during that period?
Yeah, I should mention, why did I not bring a copy of this? There's a new map that's just been published by Revolutionary Westchester 250. And it's a map of Westchester in the Revolution with all these historical sites marked out, their addresses and how to get at it.
I got that, but I'm talking about a map of the military engagements in those 6 8 years.
Yeah, well, that too. It's all included on this map. Oh, sir?
Yeah, the maps are available. The maps are available at most of the libraries.
Okay.
You can go to the website.
Yeah, that's right. You go to the website for sure.
You can order it.
Yeah. It's a beautiful piece of work, and I'm saying that I did not have any hand in producing it, so but I'm happy to praise other people's work, and this thing is a masterpiece. Ma'am?
Yeah, there is a school in White Plains named after General Rochambeau. Rochambeau's school.
Yeah.
Just say it again into the mic.
Yeah, there's a school in White Plains named after General Rochambeau, and it's on Fisher Avenue in White Plains.
Yeah, and it's on part of the White Plains battlefield. It's actually the spot where the British had their artillery to bombard the Americans across the Bronx River at Chatterton Hill. Yeah, Rochambeau himself was never there, as far as I know, but it's good to commemorate him.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful school.
It is, yeah. Sir?
My great-grandmother farmed at Quaker Ridge Road in Weaver. First off, was General Weaver part of the Revolutionary?
I think so, but I'd have to check on that. Offhand, I can't say.
And right here at this little exhibit in the library, it mentions the corner of Weaver and Quaker Ridge Road. Was it a battle site? I just can't remember where my great-grandparents' farm was.
Yeah, no, it was part of the White Plains campaign. It was where the British passed, where they split off. Some went straight into White Plains, and the others went down, ultimately Fenimore Road and to Chatterton Hill.
Okay, thanks.
Near Orchard Beach, there's a big boulder with the name of...
Glover,
Yeah.
or Glover, actually, I'm told is pronounced. People in Massachusetts tell me, but yeah, Glover's Rock.
Yeah.
Now, when I was a kid, viewing it with my grandfather 60 plus years ago, the story then was that right before the Battle of Pell's Point, that General John Glover stood there and he spied the British ships moving in to Pelham Bay. And it's not true. Glover drew up his troops about the middle of the Split Rock Golf Course, about a mile up the road from Glover's Rock. But yet it did play a role in the battle because they've turned up bits of grape shot and cannonballs. So apparently what happened is that the militia from Pelham Manor came rushing down the shore road, and they briefly engaged the British in around Glover's Rock, because it's a natural rendezvous point. So everybody grabbed their rifles and meet at the rock, whatever they called it then. But Glover never stood there apparently.
They probably just picked a really big rock to commemorate him. And also the split rock was quite large too. You could walk in between the pieces.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, which has other legends too. Allegedly it sheltered the sole survivor of the massacre of Van Hutchinson's family. Now I'm not sure I endorse that or not, but that's the legend. It's Split Rock is in kind of an isolated and difficult place to get to, so maybe wait till somebody does a walking tour before you go check it out.
Well, you don't want to be run over where the Hudson River and 95 split. That's where it is.
Yeah, and you gotta watch out for the horses too, because the trail collides with the bridle path, and not everybody knows how to deal with horses when they encounter them. If you want to know if you see a horse coming, get off the road, just stand still, just don't expect the horse to make way for you. So anyway, there's someone in the back there.
She's asking about your walking tours.
Okay, I don't have any scheduled at the moment, but if I'm doing the ones I do for the Bronx River Alliance, you go www.bronxriver.org, all one word, Bronx River, and that'll be posted there in the events column. So I hope to do some this year. Anybody else? Guess not.
I could give you one.
Well, sure, go ahead.
Just a second. Since we're in Scarsdale, some of the research that I did for my Scarsdale presentation talked about a skirmish before the day of the Battle of White Plains in the morning, right around where we were just talking about the two columns splitting, and right around where there's a famous house there.
Yeah, that became house headquarters.
Griffin House.
Griffin House, yeah.
What do you know about that skirmish?
Well, basically there was a brigade of troops posted there under General Joseph Spencer, who, by the way, was a distant relative of Princess Diana. But I love all these little footnotes. But basically they were there as a speed bump, in modern terms. That if the British swung down the Fenimore Road instead of continuing straight down Mamaroneck Avenue, they'd be there to engage in, and word to go to Washington that there's a British force coming this way and not that way. So they collided with a group of Hessians, and they fought a brief battle. It was another one of these stone-wall to stone-wall battles. But they couldn't hold forever. The Hessians brought out their dragoons, and the Americans decided wisely it was time to split and head for the ford to get to Chatterton Hill. Now I think, and I can't prove this, and I'm hoping to run this down eventually, I think some of those stone walls along Fenimore Road are original from the 18th century. They look like it, they don't look like decorative, suburban stone walls at all, but can't prove it. How do you prove somebody this? It's hard to do, but that's my gut feeling, some of those walls, particularly the one there's a wall that's like about 6 feet high. I would bet on it, but...
Thank you.
So, anyone else? Well, I want to thank everybody for coming here and sharing the history. And again, keep an eye on the websites. There's just going to be oodles of reenactments, commemorations. This is the year for it. And you'll probably see me at a lot of places too. Thank you.